So, shall we start, maybe? Okay, so thanks everybody for coming to this new session of the April seminar. Some months that we had our last one, so happy to see you all back here. So as you know, today we have with us Madame from the University of Granada. I'm sure you know her, philosopher of logic, mathematics, philosopher of language. She has published many different books, papers on many different areas of philosophy. And, well, further ado, the title of the talk today, The Fate of Fregean Logicism, Lessons Learned and Forgotten. So, where you want, please.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure. And I'm very happy to be here for several different reasons, but the most professional one is that I think, and I mean it, that you are the best audience that I can have to test or to check my intuitions about the Russell paradox. I must confess you that I'm sort of blind for paradoxes. I cannot find the fun or the interest in dwelling with paradoxes. I know that there is a sort of a whole branch of analytic philosophy which focuses on paradoxes, but for me paradoxes are just red flags. They are just sort of evidence that something is wrong or has gone wrong, and our sort of responsibility is to solve them. And what I'm going to present you today is my arguments to sort of back my intuition that in fact there is no Russell's paradox. Maybe there is a Russell's paradox in Russell's writings, in Russell's theory of relations, but not concerning Frege's position, because I think, and this is what I'm trying to, I was about to say, I'm going to try to convince you, but this is not the point. The point is, I'm trying to present my intuitions here, and I hope that you are going to be able to point at the weaknesses of my argument. I cannot see them. I think that the whole argument is well developed, but the problem is that there are some sort of blind spots that have to do with the use of formal languages and also with the use of natural languages, and this is what I'm going to try to show you today. So, well, I have told you that this is these labels have to do with institutions and projects that fund my research. That you know that this is the way. Of course, I'm not going to begin with this, but it's something just to give some context. These questions are always in the background of my mind. So I'm always thinking, okay, what is exactly analytic philosophy? Because I don't understand what we mean by analytic philosophy. Of course, I'm an analytic philosopher, but I don't understand, and I don't understand in which sense. No, yeah. Sorry. Here. Don't worry. And I don't understand in which sense we can say that Russell, I understand in which sense Russell is an analytic philosopher, but I don't understand in which sense Frege is an analytic philosopher. And also, something that I'm always in the background of I have always in the background of my research is whether contemporary logic, the thing that this kind of discipline that we call mathematical logic or formal logic, is the legit heir of Frege's work. My answer to this question is that it is not. That there is not nothing, but almost nothing. There is nothing left of the Fregean thought in contemporary formal logic. And this is neither good nor bad. So this is not a criticism against formal logic. What I mean is that sometimes we blame Frege of not having done blah blah whatever. It's not his fault. So his logicism has nothing to do with the fate of contemporary logic. This is what I'm going to present today here. So we philosophers, this is something usually I say, or I present myself as a pragmatist, and I am, but my pragmatism is very thin. So the only thing that the only aspect of my pragmatism that I consider relevant for the way in which I'm going to present my research here is this idea that the things that we do should have a meaning, should have some kind of sense, and should be related to the way in which we, rational beings, work and act and behave when we are engaged in rational activities. So this is the minimal sense of pragmatism in which I consider myself a pragmatist philosopher, nothing else. There is here a question: did we get everything wrong? And concerning the interpretation of Frege's semantics, I would say yes, we did. So the kind of semantics that we consider today, the received Fregean view, is, as much as I see now, completely strange from Frege's real concerns. So I think that we have got Frege wrong. And if we had him right, we could see that he had the tools to have answered in a different way to Russell's objection. This is the point of my talk. So the priority of propositions is my last book. You know it. And when I think about, so the reason why I wrote this book, and I call it A Pragmatist Philosophy of Logic, is because I wanted to make not just some, but to connect logic with our inferential practice. And this has to do with the kind of animals that we are, and this is why I'm very much interested in Brandon's philosophy or Brandon's position, and also Sokolowski is a philosopher that I have very recently discovered, and that have similar positions. What he says is something very similar to the kind of proposal that Brandon made. So now, the framework of my talk. To be rational is to be responsible to reason. This is what I think about the kind of animal that we are. We are rational animals because we are responsible to reasons. So human beings are essentially both producers and consumers of reasons, and in this sense we live in the realm of abstract object. So the abstract entities are the food for our thinking, of our thought, and they are the food for our rational activities. So I have said that we are rational animals because we are producers and consumers of reasons. Reasons are propositions. An alternative way of calling proposition are these ones: judgeable contents, what is said, even lectum sometimes. And in my view, in this view, not just in my view, in Frege's view, propositions takes priority over concepts, and propositions take priority over sentences. The plan of this talk, this is not true because this is too much. It's the plan that I have in my mind, but I'm going to focus on the last parts of this plan. But I want you to keep in mind the whole argument. So the plan of my talk is to identify some semantic principles characteristic of a pragmatist approach to logic, or to language, or to communication. Contrast this this pragmatist approach with representationalism and semantic position, the standard semantic position in the 20th and 21st centuries. I'm not going to develop that because this would be too much. And also apply this pragmatist framework to the Frege-Russell exchange, and then assess whether these semantic principles dissolve the difficulty that Frege saw in Frege's, that Russell saw in Frege's writings. But in fact, this is the plan that is running in the background. This is what I want to do. But the two levels is what I have presented in my book. So my book has these two levels. First, the general semantic discussion, but on the other hand, there is a historical discussion with Frege's position. And I also believe that Frege had this kind of pragmatist approach to communication. So the plan running in the background is to identify these pragmatic principles in Frege's work and reinterpret Frege's semantics in the light of this principle, examine whether Frege later rejected this principle, because I have to say something about this. I'm not going to say anything about this today, but I have to mention this because you know that there is a standard or classical interpretation of Frege thought, the idea that there are two Freges, some people think that there are two Wittgensteins, and that the first Frege was more pragmatist, inferentialist, and I don't know, relaxed about semantics principle, but that from 1891, 1892 on, he changed his mind to focus on truth instead of on inference, and in this sense, he turned into a more sort of semanticist philosopher. I think that this is wrong. I think that this is wrong. I think that there is that there is just one Frege. No, there are not two Freges, and that and you can see that if you carefully read some posthumous writings, and specifically the correspondence with some authors, Husserl or Hilbert or Russell, etc. But yeah, some people think that. I mention this because for some people, for some classical interpreters of Frege's thought, probably my argument that Frege had the tools to answer in a different way to Russell's objection would be true for the first Frege, but not for the second one. What I'm trying to tell you is that this is true for the only Frege. Okay? And I want to apply this pragmatist framework that I identify in Frege's work to the Frege-Russell exchange. I would like to see whether Frege had the tools to answer in a different way to Russell's objection, and in any case, I would like to evaluate the scope of the Russell paradox for the fate of Fregean Logicism, I know that Frege panicked, so I'm well aware. I don't understand why. I mean, I can understand it from a psychological point of view, but I think that from a logical point of view, his reaction was completely unwarranted, and this is what I would like to present to you today. So, the 5 Fregean principles that I have identified in my book, I consider them absolutely Fregean. The first one is the assertion principle, the second the context principle, the principle of propositional priority, the principle of grammar superseding, and the principle of inferential individuation. The principle of assertion is what appears in the second section of Begriffsschrift, and this idea that assertion is the minimal act required to produce output with logical properties. The second one, the context principle, you know that this formulation, only in the context of a sentence does a word have meaning. This formulation is exactly the formulation that appears in the prologue of the Foundation of Arithmetic, but in Begriffsschrift, the principle is not stated, but it is put to work. So Frege uses the principle, for instance, to discuss his idea about what is a function and what is an argument, this kind of when he talks about generality. The principle of grammar superseding, you know that Frege thought that grammatical analysis is not a source of logical knowledge, and this means, there is a small arrow here, the principle of grammar superseding has several consequences. Among them, that there are several relationships between sentences and their senses, whatever this is. So sometimes we can see that the relationship between a sentence and its sense is one-to-one, in some sense of sense, and some other times we can see that the relationship is many-to-one. Whatever. So, and also that there are several senses of sense with different identification and individuation criteria. It's something that several very good Frege scholars have stressed, among them Karlopenko. And two other principles. The principle of propositional priority. The primary bearers of logical relations, are propositions and sets of propositions, and the last one is the principle of inferential individuation, which is two sentences uttered by an agent in context express one and the same proposition if and only if their contexts follow from the same set of propositions and the same set of propositions follows from them. This inferential individuation has, again, very consequential consequences, or very relevant consequences, among them that all logically equivalent sentences express one and the same thought. This is something that literally Frege told to Husserl in one of their letters. Damn it, think that this is wrong, this is right for some sense of proposition. Maybe it's not right for all the senses of proposition that we need in our semantic, but for some sense of the term proposition, this is obviously right, and Frege was well aware of it, and also that thoughts, in this sense, are non-structured entities. Thoughts don't have parts, and this is something that Frege accepted. So this is the background, the general background, the thing that I wanted to keep you in mind in order to understand what I want. So the point that I'm going to make. So you know exactly what Russell wrote to Frege. So I have encountered a difficulty only on one point. You assert that a function could also constitute the indefinite element. This is what I used to believe, but this view now seems to me obvious because of the following contradiction. Let W be the predicate of being a predicate which cannot be predicated of itself. Can W be predicated of itself? From each answer follows is contradictory. We must therefore conclude that W is not a predicate. Likewise, there is no class as a whole of those classes which, as wholes, are non-members of themselves. From this, I conclude that under certain circumstances, a definable set doesn't form a whole. I think that here is the contradiction and the solution. Full stop. We could stop here. But you know that the exchange continued and that it was very... so that it affected Frege very much, because he thought that the work of his life was a failure. It is not that easy to understand what is going on in the exchange between Frege and Russell, because they are using terms in different senses. So there is a point in which they you can detect several fallacies of equivocation when you look at the correspondence between them. And I'm going to point to some of them. And this will help us to understand exactly what is going behind the exchange. For instance, the word proposition is a disgrace that the word proposition had been, or is being even today, the translation of the Fregean word Satz, or in plural Sätze. In German, Satz and Sätze are sentence and sentences. Frege never confused these two levels, the levels of the expression and the levels of the content. But in the English translations and in the Spanish translations of the Frege's work, there is a systematically way of translating Sat and Sätze as proposition and propositions. So sometimes when people in English or in Spanish discuss whether propositions are structured or not, they are talking about different things. Propositions, if you think of propositions as sentences, Sätze, of course, they are structured entities. And for them, it holds the principle of compositionality. But if we think of propositions as Gedanke, thoughts, then they don't have parts. So sometimes when you read these kind of exchanges, you can say, but I mean, they are not talking about the same thing. And this is quite relevant. Second, a second source of misunderstandings is that Frege and Russell are not using the word class or classes in the same sense. And this is not a criticism of any one of them, because you can see, and this is for me absolutely stimulating, you can see them, you can see these great mathematicians thinking they are building up a new discipline, set theory, but they don't. At that time they didn't have all the concept completely clear, and you can see that they are sort of struggling with different options. For instance, for Frege, a class is a logical object, and it's something stable, and a class doesn't have parts or doesn't have elements. Of course, a class has elements, but once that you identify it as a logical object, it turns into something sort of compact. It's an object, that's it. Whereas Frege sometimes think of classes as if they were wholes or systems. And Frege says to him, okay, you are thinking of classes as something that have parts, and the parts of your systems or classes are parts of the first one, whereas the parts of the elements of a class are not elements of the class. And for instance, Frege feels the need of telling Russell that the only members of the class of prime numbers are the prime numbers, but not the class of prime numbers of the form 4n plus 1. So in this sense, it seems that Russell fails to distinguish between membership and inclusion, which is very relevant. It is very relevant for the paradox. And also that classes, which are extension of concepts, are logical objects, but systems or wholes are not. They cannot be the sort of extensions or of predicates. And something which is also interesting, there is a sense in which all of us know it, but sometimes we forget. And this is that classes or extensions are not the Bedeutungen of concepts or the Bedeutungen of predicates. So Frege distinguishes between, so concerning predicates or concerning concept, between sense, meaning, and extension. And this is relevant to the analysis of the paradox. So concept words or predicates have concepts as Bedeutungen. The meaning of a concept word is a concept. It's not an extension. It's not an object. Extensions are objects and are saturated entities. But concepts as Bedeutungen of concept words are unsaturated entities. So concept words are unsaturated expressions, cannot be the subject of a sentence. A concept word cannot be the subject of a sentence because the reference, the meaning, the Bedeutung of a concept word is a concept, not an object. And concept cannot take the place of object in Gedanken, in thoughts. So here we are. I have identified two different ways, two different strategies to block the paradox. Again, I'm not trying to block the paradox from my point of view. I want to show you that Frege had the tools, not that we have the tools. Of course we have the tools, but Frege did the tools, did have the tools too. So, and I have identified two different ways of approaching the paradox. What I have called, whatever, so bottom-up zoom-in strategy, which means that we are going to focus on the difference between concept and object, thoughts and sentences, need saturated and unsaturated part. So the difference between concept and object means that for Frege, you cannot, I was going to say, you cannot build a thought, but we don't build thoughts. Thoughts are primitive. So, but for Frege, thoughts need to be divided into, so need to be analyzed into a saturated and an unsaturated part. But two saturated parts and two unsaturated parts can't form a thought. You know, so we need a part which is saturated and a part which is unsaturated. And concept or predicates cannot be the subject of sentences. Well, I have already said this. And then I'm going to show you that there is another strategy, probably clearer or more simple, which is the top-down, zoom-out strategy, which has to do with the use of the principles that I have mentioned at the beginning of my talk, which are, so is this idea that the first one, so the first thing that we do with words, the first thing that we do with concept is asserting something. So we cannot identify, we cannot think, we cannot build up, we cannot construct predicates of concept. We are just combining words. This combinatorial strategy is completely alien to the Fregean approach. So we need first to have a judgeable content from which we can abstract or either identify or analyze out a concept. This is the second strategy. And here I'm going to use Ramsey to support what I'm saying. I don't know if you remember, this is a text, a paragraph from The Nature of Truth, which is one of his posthumous writings, which was published in 1991. And there, what Ramsey said is sometimes that his definition of truth, which was what you believe is true, if and only if, so if you believe that, so P let's begin again. P is a true belief if and only if you believe that P and P. The problem is that a lot of people, many people, at that time and today, think that this definition of truth is ill-formed because the second occurrence of P, of the variable, needs some kind of, let's say, dummy predicate to be a well-formed sentence. And usually people think of is true, and P is true, as the kind of dummy predicate that could restore the grammaticality, let's say. And then, this is what Ramsey answered. We claim to have defined truth, so we claim to have defined truth, then we ought to be able to substitute our definition for the word true whenever it occurs. But the difficulty we have mentioned renders this impossible in ordinary language, which treats what should really be called prose sentences as if they were pronouns. What is the point here? The point here is every time that we use a pronoun in natural languages or a variable in singular language, in formal languages, we assume, and this is something that has to be with our way of interpreting language, we assume that this, or the reference of this pronoun, or the reference of this variable, is a name, has the category of a name, and then is an object. I'm going to say it again. The idea is that in natural languages, every time that we have a pronoun, we assume, for linguistic reasons, that this is a singular term. But sometimes, for analyzing truth, for defining truth, we need some other categories of variables. For instance, we need variables of the sentential kind, and this is why Ramsey says prose sentences, which are a complete sentence, and then the P in the second conjunct of the conjunction is a complete sentence and doesn't need any completion with a dummy predicate. This is the point. Well, I'm using Ramsey's suggestion because I think that something very similar happens with the Russell paradox. We assume that the subject, the grammatical subject of the sentences that Russell is using to formulate the paradox, we assume that they represent objects or that they have the linguistic category of terms. And what I would like to show you is that they don't. They are concepts, not terms, not singular terms, they are not names. And Frege saw it, and Frege tried to convince Russell that he was wrong in the way in which he was rewording the paradox. And I'm going to read because I want you to see it. Incidentally, the expression, this is Frege answering Russell. It's Frege. Incidentally, the expression a predicate is predicated of itself doesn't seem exact to me. A predicate is, as a rule, a first-level function which requires an object as argument, and which cannot therefore have itself as argument, as subject. Therefore, I would rather say a concept is predicated of its own extension. If the function phi of x is a concept, I designate its extension or the pertinent class by I don't know how to read it either in English or in Spanish, the x or the x such as phi of x. Though I now have some doubts about the justification for this. So the phi of the x, that phi of x, or the phi of whatever you can read, so whatever is this, is then the predication of the concept of its own extension. I have right here step 1, because it's the step 1 of the arguments in the handout, just in case you want to see it. What I'm going to show you here now in the slide is exactly what you can see in the handout, but just in case you want to go back and forth. So now, this is the analysis. And in this analysis, I have followed exactly what Frege is saying. And for this, I'm very happy that we have this whiteboard here, because it's not that easy. And sometimes we don't know what is the meaning of some of the signs that he is using. A concept is predicated of its own extension. Okay, but this is not the concept or whatever that produces the paradox. To build up the concept that produces the paradox, we should say something like, the concept of all concepts that cannot be predicated of their own extensions. Now, this, to me, doesn't mean anything. What is the concept of all concepts that cannot be predicated of their own extension? I don't know. But so let's try again. This, which is between quotation mark, is the name of a concept. So something, we have here the argument place, is a concept that cannot be predicated of its own extension. This is the concept. Something is the concept that cannot be predicated of its own extension. Okay. As I see it, Frege says it, and I'm going to show it to you. This is the name of a concept, what is between quotation marks. The concept name cannot form a true, well-formed sentence independently of the logical status of the argument that fill the argument place. So, if the argument that fills, it doesn't work, if the argument that fills this argument place is a name, meaning an object, then the whole sentence is false, because a name, an object, cannot be a concept of any kind. But if the concept is a concept, then this is not a well-formed sentence, because we cannot have concepts as subjects of sentences. We can have names of concepts, but not concepts. So, we need an unsaturated expression or entity combined with an unsaturated one. This is step 2.1 in my handout. But this is exactly what Frege says. He says many different things, and I have tried to understand him, and for this I need your help. Frege says, the difficulty in the proposition, so listen to this, a function never takes the place of a subject is only an apparent one occasioned by the inexactness of the linguistic expression. For the words function and concept should, properly speaking, be rejected. Logically, they should be names of second-level functions, but they present themselves linguistically as names of first-level functions. It is not surprising that we run into difficulties in using them. If we want to express ourselves precisely, our only option is to talk about words or signs. So this concept name is mentioned, not used, because if it is used, we don't have a Gedanke, we don't have a thought. Okay? So this is what I have tried, the way in which I have tried to understand what Frege is saying, but I'm not sure about this. So, but we can leave this aside till the end of my talk, and maybe we can go back to it if you are interested, because I'm not completely sure that I have understood. Sometimes I'm not sure that I have understood. I don't understand what Frege is saying, and I don't even know whether Frege understands himself. What happened here? Oh, here. So, again, this is exactly the same line of argument. Russell said, X can never take the place of a proper name is a false sentence. Frege says proposition, but it's a false sentence. If X is a proper name. And Frege agrees, grants this. But Russell continues, otherwise, it is not a sentence. So if X is not a sentence, if X is not a name, then the whole linguistic expression is not a sentence. And Frege rejects this. Why? Okay, so the difficulty here lies in the difference between use and mention, hidden by the use of variables. This is why I sometimes think, I really think, and this is some problem that we have in contemporary analytic philosophy, sometimes I think that, I'm so sorry, but formal languages are not our friends. Formal languages sometimes hide the logical status of the concept or object or whatever that we are mentioning or using. So what Frege answers, what Frege says is that what is correct is that if X, between quotation marks, is not a proper name, then X without quotation marks can never take the place of a proper name. And he also offers an instance of these variables. What he says is, a right substitution for X is 2 pairs of quotation marks. Frege's remark is not my remark, so is a function between 2 pairs of quotation marks. While this function with just 1 pair of quotation marks is a function name, and with 2 pairs of quotation marks is a proper name, and its meaning is the function name, whatever, without the most external pair of quotation marks. So we are mentioning functions, and then we have proper names, and then we have objects. Nobody knows what kind of objects. Frege doesn't know, of course not. They are abstract entities or they are nothing. I don't know, and I don't care. That has nothing to do with the paradox. But, there is, okay. So, for Russell to be saying something right, the predicate he is introducing must be mentioned, not used. And this changes completely the situation. And so listen to what Frege says. In something is a concept that cannot be predicated of its own extension, something stands for an object. For a function name cannot take the place of something. Something cannot be the predicate, can be the mentioning of the name of this function, but not the function itself. So thus, something is a concept that can or cannot be predicated of its own extension is always false. But it's more than false. It is a category mistake in the same sense in which Julius Caesar is prime is a category mistake, because they don't have the right logical status to be put together. So let's try a different alternative. I'm trying to be fair, so I'm offering different alternatives. So The next alternative is step 2.2 in my handout, the class of all concepts that cannot be predicated of their own extension. Can this class be predicated of its own extension? The answer is no, because a class cannot be predicated of anything. A class is an object, it's not a predicate. Okay, a further alternative. Okay, sorry, there is something missing here. Probably is the class of all classes that has members of its own extension. Let W say the class of all classes that can be of all classes, members of its own extension. Sorry, you have it in the handout. Can this class be a member of its own extension? The answer is no. Because concepts, so the class, sorry. Or it's the same. It's the same. So there is nothing missing. So can W, the class of all concepts that cannot be predicated of their own extension, can W be a member of its own extension? And what I'm saying is, if this is the class of all concepts that cannot be predicated of their own extensions, then W cannot be a member of its own extension because the elements of its extensions are concepts and not classes. This is what I have said before. Then, a new alternative. The class of all classes that do not belong to themselves, which is the way in which we have rewarding the paradox in extensional terms, in completely extensional terms. And here, so that this class belongs to itself, and here is where Frege answers with the difference between classes as logical objects and systems or wholes are entities that have parts and that these parts are also members of the first system. So what he says is, if we are given a whole, it is not yet determined what we are to envisage as its parts. On the other hand, if we are given a class, it is determined what objects are members of it. The only members of a class of prime numbers are the prime numbers, but not the class of prime numbers of the form 4n plus 1. Sorry for the typo. For this class is not a prime number. The objects that are members of a class can at the same time form a system. Okay, this is possible, but the system must still be distinguished from the class. It seems to me that you want to admit only systems and not classes. So Frege is telling Russell that he is thinking of systems, but not classes. He is not thinking of logical objects. Okay. This is the end of this strategy. I'm going to just to rephrase it or to summarize it. The idea is, if we take seriously the difference between concept and object, and the idea that the meaning of a concept is a concept, and that the meaning of a concept or of something is what is a part of the proposition expressed by the sentence in which it occurs, then there is no way of developing the paradox talking about the predicate of all predicates, blah, 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 because in order to build up or to have a well-formed sentence, the subject, if we want to talk about concept, the subject must be the name of a concept, and thus a name, but not the concept itself, because otherwise the logical nature, the logical status of their meanings of the two parts of the sentence are not appropriate to form a unified judgeable content. I don't know if I make myself understood. We have the whiteboard, so this is good. This is the point. I know that what Frege is saying is not completely obvious. It's not completely obvious. But I think that there is a sense in which clear, but the problem is, and this is why I have used Ramsey here, it's impossible to completely develop the argument or completely disclose the argument, because neither natural languages nor formal languages are appropriate to express this kind of abstract relationship between entities or whatever. Now, so let's stop here and go to the next one. This one is easier, I think. This is the one that I included in my book. What I have told you today is completely new, so I haven't published it yet. But this is more or less, I think it's clearer now, because now I understand it better. You know that sometimes you think that you understand, and when you keep going, you realize that maybe your ideas were not as clear as you thought. So, the top-down strategy, and I'm going to say it directly. The top-down, I mean, I don't even know if I want to go to the idea is, if we take seriously that Frege accepted this principle that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk as the principles the principle which characterize or set up the scenario for his semantic discussion, then the only way in which we can accept a new concept or a new predicate is by analyzing it out from a sentence actually used or usable in an actual act of assertion. And this is impossible with the predicate that Russell construct or build up, because the only way in which we can use, in some sense, this predicate is by mentioning it. The only thing that we can do with it is, look, the predicate of the predicate that cannot be predicated of themselves is not a predicate, or cannot be used, or produce contradictions, or whatever. But you cannot offer a real assertion, and in this sense, a judgeable content in which this concept is actually used, as opposed to mentioned. So, to establish this second sort of strategy to block the paradox, I would need to show that the principle of context accompanied Frege throughout his work. And I think it did. So Frege never rejected the principle of context. And I'm not the only Fregean who thinks that. So I have used in my book, for instance, some writings from Linnebu, for instance, who explains that Frege never rejected the principle of context. Although we can say that you have this, this text in the handout, although Frege reframed the principle into what Linebo called the generalized context principle. The generalized context principle. The generalized context principle, you have it here, and you have it, I think I remember in the handout. The idea is that the only way in which we can say that an expression has a reference, that a referential expression has a reference, is by putting it, or making of it, the argument of a bigger expression and see whether the bigger one has a reference or not. So it's a more sort of convoluted way of formalizing or formulating the context principle, but it's the same idea. So we have to make sense of the bigger expressions in order to determine whether their parts have or not reference. So it's a top-down strategy. It's not a bottom-up strategy. And this is why we can say, I think that we can say that Frege never rejected this principle of context and embraced a compositionality principle. Among other things, because a compositionality principle has to do with expressions. Has to do with expressions, so we can say that, of course, if we want to, that once that we have determined that some expressions have meaning, because we have isolated them from sentences that can be actually used, then you can use their meanings that we have determined in this way to sort of compute or determine or deciding the meaning of other expressions in which they take parts. But Frege never had, so there are some other philosophers who have defended this. Frege never had this atomistic and simplistic principle of compositionality, which assumed that we can determine whether terms have meanings in isolation. This is something that Frege never had. Something that is interesting, because when I presented the plan, I said that the last step in my whole plan is to evaluate the scope of the paradox. And I think that this paradox shouldn't have been used against Frege's position, but against Russell's position, and against the strategy of founding arithmetic on set theory, not on concepts. And in fact, you remember that naive set theories have this axiom scheme of comprehension, which is the basic law 5 in Grundgesetze. Well, it's a translation of the basic law 5 in Grundgesetze, but some set theories, some families of set theories changed this principle, this generalized or naive principle of comprehension, with what we call now the separation action, or the axiom schema of specification, which is that one. So we can say that a class or a set exists if we can separate it from an already existent class. Well, this is the extensional version of what I'm defending here. What I'm defending here is that you cannot have a concept unless you abstract it out of a judgeable content. But this is something that Frege had from the beginning. So the difference between the action of separation is that, as I see it, This maneuver is ad hoc. What I'm proposing is not, because this principle of the priority of proposition and the principle of context are with Frege from the beginning. So, if we had followed this strategy, we have had a very robust reason to reject Russell's criticism. And I think that I'm going to finish here, because I want to listen to your objections, and eskerrik asko. Thank you very much.
So, time for questions. Comments, criticisms, objections.
You can go back to the handout, because I have tried to say things as clear as I have been able to do it. So, because I don't want to hide anything, because I'm not interested in, I don't know, in presenting something which is not completely clear. And this is something that is with me, this kind of intuition that there is, in fact, there is no Russell's paradox. It's something that I have thought since the first time I began to, when I began to read Frege. So let me know whether you see any unclarity, inconsistency, something in the way in which I have represented what Frege is saying in his letters.
Can I start not with a question, maybe more a comment?
Please.
This seems to be related to the horse concept problem, right?
Exactly. It's completely this problem. Yeah.
To take a simple example, so it seems that you are making the same move, right? There's something weird about this sentence in Frege system, because when you look at it pretty theoretically, you see the concept horse is not a concept, that seems false. But in Frege system, that seems simply meaningless, right? Because the concept horse is not a concept, it's a meaningless sentence, because the concept horse is not a singular term, because it should be sort of expressing a concept, so you cannot just put it in subject position.
Exactly.
It seems like you're making the same move, but for the Russell paradox,
Yes.
to the concept of
Yes.
all concepts that cannot be predicated, something like that. There seems to be something.
It's exactly the same thing, but, so you know that this paradox of the concept horse is something that Kerry or whatever, that Frege explained in Concept and Object, I think, in 1891. And I have tried to use it here, but it's of no use for me, because it's very difficult. It's again the same problem, and this is why I haven't said this, because I wanted to stop and to listen to you. I haven't said this in my presentation, but I had this slide here, because the idea is that this content, which has the content stroke, is a conceptual content, and this concept, which is preceded by the judgment stroke, is a content. Both contents are the same content, but you cannot say it, because every time that you try to express this in a natural language, so remember that Frege said that the content stroke should be read as the proposition that, or the circumstance that. This is what he says in Begriffsschrift, and, for instance, Paul Horridge, in a completely different context, had called this kind of prefixes as nominalizers. So every time that we try to mention or to present this kind of content without asserting it, we have to do it using a singular term. A singular term which theoretically has an object as its content. You know what I mean? And this is why, and this is exactly the problem with the concept horse. And this is why I have used Ramsey here. Because every time that, we can do that. But we cannot say it in natural languages.
So what's the connection between Ramsey and this?
The connection is that every time that you want to say something about, using either, the connection is with a content in general, a proposition, a concept. A proposition and a concept. Let's stop here. You can do two different things. You can refer to it or designate it or express it, the same content. But every time that you refer to it, you convert it linguistically. So you need to use linguistically a singular term. And if you use a singular term, you have the assumption that its content is an object. But this is not true. This is the problem of the.
Yeah, that seems to be.
And but this is why. And I told you yesterday that every time that I think about this situation, about this argument, I'm duck rabbiting, because I see it and suddenly I don't. And this is the problem. The problem is that it's very difficult to represent the logical status of concept if it is not either putting them to work in a judgeable content or mentioning them. If you mention them, what you are doing is naming them, and so you are not using them. And this is why Frege says that something, and I don't remember, something or a function and something are second level expressions. I don't completely understand this. I don't, because, my feeling now is that when Frege says that function and concept, in this case, are second level, he's using second level in a different way in which he has used the same expressions to talk to quantifiers, for instance. I have this impression, but I don't know.
Can I make a very naive, silly, clarificatory question? Because I feel that I'm lost.
Okay, go.
So how is it possible to talk about concepts?
We can talk about concepts, so we can mention them. We can mention them. And but this is a very good question, and we can, according to Frege, we cannot talk about them in isolation, in the sense that we cannot, exactly, so out of a context. But this is a very good question, but that you should ask Frege, not me. What I'm saying, when we can use, okay. So I'll tell you why. So what I mean is that this is what follows from Frege's semantics. What I'm saying is that in Frege's semantics, you can mention the name of a concept, but you cannot talk of concepts, although you can use them as part, not parts, but as part of judgeable contents. You can put them to work. So, I cannot see in which sense Frege thought that Russell's paradox exposed a weakness of his position. His position has probably a lot of weaknesses, but not that one. I don't know.
Bigger ones. But okay.
I don't know.
Eros, I think you had a question?
Yeah. Very basic and possibly stupid question.
There are no stupid questions.
Seems to be, well, one way, it's general, but something we may find in the Tractatus, Wittgenstein Tractatus.
Yes.
Can be shown, must not be said, and we got, and these go along well, from what I remember, reading the Tractatus and what we mean 40 or more years ago. But Frege take a function to be. A function is a primitive and something that cannot be defined. It can be shown how it works and how it, and here is what the use mention coming in. And about the use mention, I remember a class by Kaplan long ago as well, was criticizing on the noting because Russell was often making kind of a mistake between use and mention.
You are completely right, absolutely right. And I have been thinking, and one of my PhD students is working on making the connections between the Tractatus and Frege, because, and this is why at the beginning of my talk I have said, so I asked, did we get everything wrong? And I said, yes, we did. Because we thought, and I have taught to my students, I have taught to my students that Wittgenstein wrote the Tractatus against Frege, because this was the received view, that Wittgenstein was answering Frege and that Wittgenstein was saying that Frege was completely wrong about everything. Not true. Not true. Wittgenstein understood Frege. The problem was Russell. Russell didn't understood Frege and didn't understood Wittgenstein. And we are Russell's heirs, unfortunately. But you are completely right. So the distinction, when you go so deep into the abstract world, when you go so deep into the semantic foundation of our languages and conceptual systems, we don't have the resources to say things. We can only show them. So you are absolutely right.
I truly like your talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I have too many things to think about. Right?
Go on.
If I understood, I didn't understand everything, of course. But just a short question is this thing about thoughts do not have parts. Could you give us some textual evidence or hints where?
Many. I have, probably not now, but I mean, or now.
No.
But I'm going to tell you, so in my book there are many, but for instance, I remember, I cannot tell you now, my memory is not that good, that Frege said, probably in the thought, 1918, that when we say parts concerning a thought, we are not saying parts in a literal sense. He says that, and I have also written, and I have seen very recently that some other Fregean scholar, some Fregean scholar, says exactly this, what I'm going to say now. This interesting piece of the logical investigations, compound thoughts, is the argument to show that Gedanken don't have parts, so don't have structure, because the same thought can be represented even in a logically perfect language using different logical structures.
Yeah.
But there are many references to that. And some people, some scholars say, okay, yeah, but in logic in mathematics, I mean, I know all the objections of this first level. In logic in mathematics, Frege said yes, but in logic in mathematics, Frege is talking about semantic values, not about assertoric content.
So when you said that, you mean that they don't have parts in the sense that there is no single sentence or no that gives you a one-to-one correspondence.
Exactly.
Okay, then I agree. Of course, okay.
That's
different. I think that's different from. I mean, they are always going to have some kind of structure showing function argument, right? Which is well, anyway.
No, but yeah, you are right. But think again. It's very difficult for us, human beings who are using articulated languages, to understand that sometimes we are using terms in a non-literal meaning. So when we say that thoughts or propositions have structure, abstract entities don't have structures. What do you mean, not you, but what can we mean by saying that abstract entity have structure? So remember yesterday I mentioned, mentioning Wittgenstein, I distinguished between vehicle and content. Of course, you cannot access a judgeable content but by expressing it by some kind of sentence. But then this judgeable content sort of acquires the structure of the sentence by means of which you have expressed it. But there is no unique analysis of the proposition.
Now I understand.
Okay?
Yeah. So now I have another different thing concerning I think there, when you meant the horizontal bar, right?
Yeah, that one.
That he says the proposition that or the circumstance that, in that case, it is that. I mean, it's not sentence, right?
It's not sentence.
There is a translation issue. So in this case, we have to understand circumstance or proposition and not just sentence.
Exactly.
Okay. So then, I have a question. I'm not saying that there are two Freges, right? But the notion of proposition is a mess. So in a sense,
without any doubt,
giving priority to them, it's a very risky start. Like entering into translation issues, but also interpretation issues. Now, as far as I can tell, in sense of reference, Frege doesn't use the term proposition.
No.
But many translations or the received view translates thought, right? His word thought, Gedanke, with proposition. So to adding to the mess of this conceptual thing. But do you think that anyway here in the Begriff shift, the notion of
conceptual content,
judgeable content corresponds more or less to a kind of Russellian proposition, singular proposition involving objects and properties or properties. I mean, what later on that changes, and then we don't have objects and properties, but we have senses of objects and senses of properties. And that's a very radical departure. I mean, that's a different semantics. One is one level with language and the word, and the other one you have something in between language and the word, and then of course he distinguishes extension and bedeutung for concept words, but it doesn't for sentences. So you end up having at the level of the bedeutung, you have truth values, and that's new. As you said yesterday, truth values were not in the Begriffsschrift.
No.
But there are later on as bedeutungen of sentences, and so there are some significant differences between these phases of these works of Frege's that add to messing up and to having lots of, because you're saying the fallacy of equivocity, right?
Yeah, equivocation, yeah.
I'm not sure whether we're making it clear or we are entering into talking each other, past each other again.
But,
because we are talking, you said, Russell and Frege are talking about different things. Yeah, and we are not distinguishing that, so we are still adding up to the mess. That's my...
Yeah, thank you very much, because it's a very relevant question and a very relevant remark. But I don't think that there is a different notion of proposition in Frege's work. For instance, I cannot see in which sense. I know that some authors, for instance, I'm thinking of Sullivan and other people who have thought that the notion of proposition thought, judgeable content in Begriffsschrift is similar to singular proposition in Russell. I think that there is nothing like that in Frege, ever. So I don't think that there is a change in position, because this position was never defended by Frege as I see it. But, and you say that truth values, again, this is a scholastic difficulty, because Frege says literally that a thought, a proposition, a judgeable content is something for which the truth or the false truth makes sense, or it makes sense to ask about its truth. And we can say this saying that they have truth values as Bedeutungen. But this is a way of talking. It's just a rephrasing of the basic idea that propositions and judgeable contents are something for which truth and falsity make sense. And this is exactly what Wittgenstein says, not just in the Tractatus, but also in the Proto-Tractatus, when he says that propositions are essentially bipolar. This is exactly what Frege means by saying in a very unclear way, in some sense a misleading way, that the Bedeutungen of sentences are truth values. When I think about this, I think, okay, he was a mathematician, so he wanted to unify the language, to unify the critical apparatus. But that's it. I cannot see a difference between the Fregean truth values are the Bedeutungen of sentences, and the Wittgensteinian propositions are essentially bipolar. I think that this is exactly the same thing. And I have also some, now have some sort of evidence of that, because apparently, and I say apparently because I don't know anything about German idealism and German philosophy in the 19th, apparently the neo-Kantian philosopher with whom Frege was discussing assumed that so they talk about the values of sentences as truth values, and I think that Gottlieb Gabriel explains that Bedeutungen and values, the translation of values, in German and in this debate with neo-Kantians in the 19th century, meant something like interest or significance or relevance. Value, value is a very polysemic word, and apparently my German is not that good. Bedeutung is also a very polysemic word, but the neo-Kantians with whom Frege was discussing use Bedeutungen as values in the sense of what is relevant, what has value. And in this sense, so I must apologize, because when I read Frege at the beginning, I didn't know anything about these surroundings, philosophical surroundings, and we tried, all of us, and this is the problem with the received view, that we understood Frege through Russell's eyes. A very big mistake. as I see it now. But thank you very much, because this is very relevant.
Yeah, well, this is such a big topic, propositions, and that I got lost. But I'm going to make like two. I mean, this is super cool. There's so much to discuss and to. But I'm going to make like just two very small comments about your. I shouldn't say solutions to the paradox.
Solution, no, the explanation of what I have seen.
Claim that, you know, the first one is you said in the first alternative, the bottom up.
Oh, here. Yeah.
But it's nothing too deep. It's just apparently there's a letter which I didn't know, where Frege tells Russell that he's confusing belonging with including it.
This is my interpretation.
Okay.
What he, no, it's my interpretation, but it's clear. Yeah. There is no doubt about it. Because what, just for clarification, what Frege is telling Russell is that the member of a class is not a member of the class, but that the parts of a whole are parts of the whole.
Yeah.
And this, my way of representing it is by making or showing the difference between membership and inclusion. And for me it was, as you say, super cool to see that Russell wasn't clear about this very basic distinction in set theory, because they were sort of building up this discipline. So that the first one who talked about set theories, the origin of set theory is Cantor, 1884. And they are writing around 19th century, so it's nothing. But okay, so go ahead.
It was precisely, in a sense, it's just to check if this was actually what Frege said. In a sense, it's like it's so obvious.
Obvious.
But what I'm saying is probably it's because you do a very good job. I mean, the way you present is like how didn't Frege see that there was because it leads to a categorical mistake.
Completely.
If all you said is true in the first alternative, you end up with something like a categorical mistake. So my question was more general, like, how didn't Frege realize, or even Russell, that?
This is not your question, this is my question.
Okay. So
this is my question. Why? But it's my question about Russell and about the liar paradox and about all paradoxes so I used to say, so I say to my students and when I give a talk like today, that everything that I say is obvious. Everything that I say is obvious, but it's so difficult to say it. But I see it.
Yeah.
I can see it. So now I have to convince you that this is obvious. But this is obvious. It's like, okay, the emperor is naked. He's naked, beg your pardon. And Russell knew it. And something interesting. You know this philosopher, this woman philosopher, Daniel Macbeth?
Yeah.
So Frege's logic.
Yeah.
She says, now this is interesting. She says that you know that Russell is not particularly my cup of tea. Okay. She says that Russell discovered the contradiction in his theory of relations. And I believe it. Russell's theory of relation had this problem. But then he sort of applied it to Frege, and the poor one, I don't understand why, was absolutely in shock. But this is a question of character. This is the kind of character that define both characters, both persons. But yes, it's so obvious. Thank you. The best thing that you can say is, okay, everything that you have said is trivial. So say it. Trivial.
But you know, you don't want to think that Frege couldn't see the trivial. That's the frustration.
No.
But another thing, maybe it's connected, because as I see it, maybe it's because of what we were talking with Javier, and then it seems like the two alternatives, they have to go together. Because if you don't have the second one, where you have the context principle and whatever, the first one...
They don't need to go together. No.
Don't you have like with this feeling of, so you can only mention concepts, but you cannot use them because you need
No. This is a different. But you are. But this is a very important question, because at the beginning I thought, okay, they are just one way of blocking the paradox, which was the top-down strategy, because this is obvious. And then I realized that this was the way that set theoretical scholars had followed by introducing the separation action. This is the interesting part. But now I see that, so because I've gone back to the foundation of arithmetics, to the prologue of the foundation of arithmetics, and there you have everything, but you have everything in separate principles. So you have the context principle, you have the idea that you have to distinguish the psychological from the logical, so he is not using concept in a psychological way, but the third one is there is an essential distinction between concept and object. So, this is the three things. We need the three things. And I think that the first strategy is independent of the second one. They are compatible, but it's independent. The problem is that the difference between use and mention is very difficult to see when you use variables. It's very difficult to see. And probably Frege, who was a mathematician, and as such, also a formalist, could understand the interest or, the beauty of Russell's puzzle or something. But as I see it now... Go ahead.
So if I remember well, Dannrecht stresses from one side that Frege used Greek letters and he distinguished them from the X, Y, etc. to make the distinction.
Exactly. And this is something, so thank you very much for mentioning it, because this is something that we have lost by accepting the way of writing, the formalism, the formal expressions inherit from set theory, from Schroeder, from Russell, we have lost all the richness that you can encounter in Frege's position. And also the bidimensional position, by the way, another neo-Kantian idea, the bidimensional way of writing formulae is very relevant to understand what Frege is doing. So when we try to sort of translate, to translate Frege's ideas into a set theoretical system, you lose a lot of finesse and subtleties. And this is a disgrace. So I'm trying to be fair to the depth of Frege's thought.
Okay, thank you for the talk. Please correct me if I say something wrong, because I don't know the
Go ahead.
Frege's foundation of arithmetic, but I'm interested in that point, the foundation of arithmetic.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we accept that the paradox argument is not true, which is necessary because it's a paradox, it cannot be true, so we would be lost in that case. But how can you ground arithmetic on concepts if in a way that doesn't lead to that categorical problem?
Mistake.
Yes, because if I am not mistaken, what Frege did more or less in a brute force way to explain it, to justify his Logicism program, is to say, for example, number 3 is like the instance containing all the sets or all the classes of 3 elements, or either. But then you would like to, for that object to belong to other sets. So you would like to mix it also with the other objects or the theory. So that doesn't necessarily leave us with this problem leading us to a categorical problem. So in that case, 3 would be a class, and this class would have to belong to other sets or other classes.
I don't think so, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain it. Frege doesn't talk about classes, and in the foundation of arithmetics, but also, for instance, in the correspondence with Russell, and also in some posthumous writings, he says that I'm thinking of a paragraph in one of his posthumous writings that he says, how can we identify, how can we recognize, how can we get in contact with a number? And he says, a number is only the extension of a concept. The extension of a concept. So he puts concepts in the center. And in the foundation of arithmetics, what he says is, as I understand it, so in the foundation of arithmetics is Fregean logicism, is Frege's logicistic or logicist proposal that has nothing to do with the Russellian logicism, which is the reduction of arithmetic to set theory. Nothing to do with the idea of Frege. Frege, what is saying is that you cannot understand what numbers are unless you understand or you interpret the sense of a numerical sentence, of our equation, the whole equation. And once that you have understood the sense of a numerical identity or whatever, an equation, then you can talk as we like, in the same sense in which we can say that truth values are objects. This is something that is specific. Saying that numbers are sets, or truth values are objects, or whatever, are just something that you can only say within this semantic framework, because it's just an abbreviation of a more complex way of speaking. If you want to understand them, this kind of abbreviation, you need to understand the basic statement. I don't know if...
Maybe also I would need to read. So, yeah, the problem is like maybe we all tend to read this in like a Russellian or theoretical approach.
Exactly.
And we also need to read Frege's mind to see, or at least, or well, you have read in detail everything that he has on written, so you probably know much more about that than me. But yes, so we need to like try to rescue the Frege's ideas and thoughts around this. So we don't have to necessarily to read his project as a way of reducing mathematics to set theory or to logic formula.
But you have said that we would need to read Frege's mind. We don't need to. Read just Frege. Read Frege. Don't read Frege's translations.
Yeah.
Read Frege. And also, something very important that you have said, so I'm with you. And I don't know everything, and I don't want to defend Frege. Yeah. I'm just saying that I cannot see the paradox. Here, I said, contrast with representationalism and semantic atomism, which is what you are saying. What you have said is completely right. So we have this tendency of understanding or interpreting what Frege is saying in these terms. Names represent objects, and then we build up, I don't know, propositions out of elements that are atomic or whatever. This has nothing to do with Frege's semantics. I'm not saying that Frege's semantics is right. I think it's right. But I'm not saying it. Not saying it. What I mean is that from this semantics, the paradox doesn't follow.
Also, Frege, for instance, he never said, as I remember, what an object is.
No, of course not.
A name is, because he said a name is what designates an object. And then he said about an object it was designated
exactly.
by a name.
But this is not wrong. This is completely right.
I'm not saying it's
No, yeah, of course. But I had the same problem. So, yeah, but he never says what an object is. Of course not. And now, something that, because nobody is listening to us, I can say that now I understand in this because I'm working on Brandon's book on Hegel. And now I can see it. I can see it. So, judgeable contents or conceptual contents, there are not facts and concepts. So, everything that to which we, as human beings, have access are in conceptual form. So, the only way that we can approach abstract entity is through the way in which we use language. So the only thing that we can say about what is an object, this that you can refer to by means of a singular term. And now I understand it, but to understand it, we need to undergo a paradigm shift. And I'm doing it. I'm transitioning into this Hegelian semantics.
When they communicate with God.
Maybe. We will see in a little while. We will see.
You have a question?
Yes, just to make just a remark. So first, very nice talk. I never read Frege, so I don't know anything about it. I mean, I know from afar. I'm more a mathematician, but also a logician. So I'm very intrigued by this second solution to
the second
alternative.
Oh, okay, is the top-down.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly. So it's I understand well. You're saying that if we take into account like Frege's approach to distinguish between object and concept and all of this, you can sort of see the axiom of separation in his system, in his set system, instead of just the general comprehension. And so my question is, how hard is it to understand that this is the case? You see what I mean? Like,
no, say it again. How hard?
How hard is it to read Frege and to understand that what he meant somehow, or maybe you can interpret what he meant as being an axiom of separation somehow?
No, the axiom of separation is something that I realize suddenly. I think, okay. So now I understand it, this second way of blocking the paradox, and then I realize, okay, yes, nothing new under the sun. So this solution is exactly the solution that, from a completely extensional point of view, set theoretical theorists have approached the paradox, have tried to block the paradox. And this, for me, is sort of contextual evidence that I'm not completely mistaken. But what
You're not saying that it is present
No.
somehow.
What I mean is that, okay, look at this. So they have done exactly what I think that Frege did, but the difference is that the axiom schema of separation is something ad hoc, because this comprehension action or schema leads to paradoxes, then the way in which we can block it is that. And I thought, okay, yes, but in the case of Frege, this is not ad hoc, because these principles are present from the beginning in his position. That's it? Okay.
I'll say, I mean, yeah, from the synthetic point of view, you have these axioms, but from the type theory point of view, you have the functions of types, which seems to be more grounded in the use of language, right? Some linguistic expressions refer to entities of basic type called objects or individuals, and then the other expressions are graphically arranged somehow, right? And this also solves the paradox. I mean, that Thomas Russell's strategy, right? Just use type theory.
Of course.
Then it gets super complicated, but that seems to be maybe closer. If you want that the solution be based on your linguistic intuitions, or at least something closer to what we think our reasoning or language works, then type theory gets slightly closer, I guess, than the synthetic axioms, and that's
Probably.
but maybe I don't know. The Frege's
So,
concept distinction is not. Is it a type distinction?
no, but
Right.
yeah, but let me tell you something. So the way in which I see it now, this is the history of logic, the 20th century, is that because they forgot contents, they felt the need of reinstalling contents by means of some sophistication of the formal languages they were using. So this is what Russell did with type theory and set theory. But let's say the original sin is having forgotten propositions and just have focused on syntax, on formal languages without a content. This was the problem. And probably our intuitions are closer to type theory than to set theory. Probably. I mean, I can accept that. But Frege's intuition are closer to what we do when we talk and when we do inferences. But this is my opinion. Fine.
Now, can I make another question?
Yeah, of course.
So now the elephant in the room, which is a kind objection. Frege cannot talk about concepts, right? Like, he can't say anything about concepts because any sentence he makes in which the
But
concept blah blah.
Have you read Frege?
Only something.
No. I mean, it was a joke. What I mean is that Frege cannot say anything about concept. He said a lot of things about concepts, and he said that only conceptual contents were the real bearers of logical properties. So he's the father of logic in one sense, the father of the philosophy of language. So what he saw and said was that sometimes, and this is something that also Wittgenstein said, is sometimes that we got caught into the traps of our language. And this is something that we should have in mind all the time. And every time that we encounter a paradox or a problem, we should think about this. But of course, that he could say a lot of things about concepts.
This sentence cannot, so they are not true because they are meaningless. If I say the concept horse is blah blah, then that is meaningless. And if I'm mentioning it, then it's false, right? Because the concept horse
It's not a concept.
It's not a concept. It's not talking about the concept horse. It's talking about the name concept horse, right? So if I use it, meaningless. If I mention it, false. Therefore, I cannot make true statements about concepts, right?
You can make true statements by using concepts, and it's the only way in which you can make true statements, by using concepts. What else? But maybe Frege was right, Frege was wrong. I'm not trying to defend him. What I'm saying is that the paradox doesn't follow from his semantics.
Any more questions? So maybe we leave it here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you.